Have you ever wondered how one of the most prosperous nations in the world could fall into the abyss of an economic depression? Picture this: the Roaring Twenties, an era brimming with economic prosperity and unprecedented optimism. The United States, a global powerhouse, was a landscape of thriving industries, bustling stock markets, and citizens' pockets lined with the promise of continuous growth. This was a time when the American dream seemed within everyone's grasp, a time of seemingly endless possibilities. But beneath this shining veneer of prosperity, a storm was brewing. A storm that would soon sweep across the nation, shattering the facade of economic invincibility. The bubble of prosperity was not built to last. Hidden within the economic boom were the weaknesses and imbalances that would lead to a catastrophic depression. The reality is, the more dazzling the prosperity, the more devastating its collapse can be. As it turns out, the seeds of disaster were sown during these seemingly prosperous times. On a fateful day in October 1929, Wall Street crashed, plunging the nation into economic despair. The day, later known as Black Tuesday, saw the stock market collapse in a way that was unprecedented in history. Investors watched in horror as billions of dollars evaporated in a matter of hours. This was no ordinary financial hiccup. The crash of 1929 was the most devastating stock market crash in the history of the United States. It wasn't just a day, but a culmination of panic selling that spanned several days. The immediate effects were shocking. Over the course of 2 days, the market lost nearly a quarter of its value. Investors were wiped out, and the public's faith in the economy was shattered. The crash didn't just affect the wealthy stockholders, it sent shockwaves through the entire economy, affecting everyone from the industrial tycoon to the average wage earner. The crash marked the end of the Roaring Twenties, a decade of economic prosperity and exuberance. It was the beginning of a period of severe economic downturn, which we now know as the Great Depression. Panic ensued. People rushed to withdraw their money from banks, leading to a series of bank runs. The banking system, already weakened by the crash, crumbled under the pressure. Thousands of banks failed, taking with them the life savings of millions of Americans. Businesses too felt the shock. With banks failing and credit drying up, many businesses were forced to close their doors. Unemployment soared as companies laid off workers or shut down entirely. The crash was a turning point. It marked the end of an era of unprecedented prosperity and the beginning of a period of hardship and struggle. It was a time of great uncertainty, as people wondered how they would survive and when the economy would recover. With banks failing and businesses closing, the United States was about to enter one of its darkest periods. The crash of 1929 was not just a financial event, but a pivotal moment in American history. It was the catalyst for a decade of economic hardship that would test the resolve of the American people and change the country forever. As the 1930s began, the United States found itself spiraling into a deep economic depression. Following the stock market crash of 1929, the economy didn't merely stumble, it plunged headfirst into a devastating downturn that would last for nearly a decade. During these early years of the 1930s, the country was gripped by widespread unemployment. Millions of Americans were out of work, and the job market was virtually non-existent. The once bustling factories fell silent, businesses shuttered, and breadlines became a common sight in cities across the country. But the hardship didn't end with unemployment. Poverty was a relentless specter, haunting both the urban and rural landscapes. Many families were evicted from their homes, unable to pay their mortgages or rent. Shantytowns, derisively referred to as Hoovervilles, after the then-President Herbert Hoover, sprang up across the nation, housing the displaced and the destitute. Meanwhile, the agricultural sector was dealt a double blow. As if the economic depression wasn't enough, the heartland was hit by an ecological disaster. Severe drought and poor farming practices led to the infamous Dust Bowl. This environmental catastrophe turned once fertile lands into barren wastelands, forcing thousands of farming families to abandon their homes in search of better opportunities. The Dust Bowl was more than an environmental crisis, it was a human tragedy. The rural communities were torn apart, their livelihoods lost, and their futures uncertain. The dust storms not only ravaged the lands but also the spirits of the people, leaving behind a trail of desolation and despair. The United States was in turmoil. The bright promise of the Roaring Twenties was now a distant memory, replaced by the harsh reality of the Great Depression. Everywhere you looked, there were signs of a nation in crisis. The nation was in a state of despair, and it seemed like there was no end in sight. The spiral downwards was not just a phase but a reality that the United States had to endure, a testament to one of the darkest periods in its history. In 1933, with the country in dire straits, a new president, Franklin D. Roosevelt, promised a New Deal for the American people. The New Deal was a series of programs, public work projects, financial reforms, and regulations that Roosevelt proposed as a part of his presidential campaign. The goal was to provide relief, recovery, and reform, not just from the economic downturn, but also from the structural issues that had led to the Great Depression. One of the key elements of the New Deal was the creation of several public works programs. These programs aimed to put people back to work, rebuilding the country's infrastructure and providing much-needed jobs to the millions of unemployed Americans. The Civilian Conservation Corps, the Works Progress Administration, and the Tennessee Valley Authority were among these pioneering programs. But it wasn't just about providing jobs. Roosevelt also sought to reform the financial system to prevent a similar crash from happening in the future. The Glass-Steagall Act, for example, separated commercial and investment banking, while the Securities Act required more transparency in the stock market. The New Deal also introduced regulations to protect the American people. The Social Security Act provided a safety net for the elderly, the disabled, and the unemployed, while the Fair Labor Standards Act established a minimum wage and maximum work week. Despite these measures, the New Deal was not without its critics. Some felt that it was too radical, that it gave the government too much power. Others thought it didn't go far enough, that it failed to address the root causes of the Depression. Regardless of these criticisms, there's no denying that the New Deal represented a significant shift in the role of the government. It marked a move towards a more active state, one that not only regulates but also intervenes in the economy to promote social welfare. The New Deal brought hope to a nation in need, but the road to recovery was long and arduous. The recovery would take years, and it wouldn't be until the onset of World War II that the American economy would truly bounce back. But in the midst of the Great Depression, the New Deal gave the American people something they desperately needed: hope. It wasn't until the late 1930s that the United States began to see signs of economic recovery. These signs were not the result of some grand economic strategy or a sudden upturn in the nation's luck. Instead, they were the product of a series of events, both domestic and global, that would ultimately pull the United States out of the Great Depression. One of the most critical factors was the onset of World War II. As Europe plunged into conflict, the United States found itself in a unique position. While it was still neutral, it could supply the Allied forces with much-needed materials and equipment. This meant factories were firing up once again, production lines were humming, and jobs were being created. The war had effectively jump-started the American economy. But it wasn't just the war that helped end the Great Depression. A series of economic reforms and public works projects, collectively known as the New Deal, played a significant role as well. These programs, initiated by President Franklin D. Roosevelt, created jobs, built infrastructure, and regulated the financial system, restoring faith in the American economy. In addition, the shift away from the gold standard allowed for more flexibility in monetary policy, enabling the government to inject more money into the economy and stimulate growth. This move, combined with the increased demand for goods from the war effort, led to a significant rise in industrial production and consequently, employment. New policies, such as the Social Security Act and the Fair Labor Standards Act, also played a part. These measures provided a safety net for the American people and set standards for wages and hours, contributing to improved living conditions and worker morale. And so the Great Depression, a period of extreme hardship and struggle, finally came to an end, leaving behind valuable lessons for future generations. Lessons about the importance of economic balance, the role of government in safeguarding that balance, and the resilience of the American spirit in the face of adversity. The Great Depression, a period of economic despair and social upheaval, left an indelible mark on American history. It all began with an unforeseen crash in 1929 that rattled Wall Street and sent shockwaves through the nation's economy. The early 1930s only saw the situation spiral downwards as worsening economic conditions pushed people to the brink, sparking widespread social unrest. Yet, amidst the chaos, emerged a beacon of hope: Roosevelt's New Deal, a series of programs, public work projects, and financial reforms aimed at providing relief for the suffering American populace. This bold and transformative initiative played a pivotal role in mitigating the effects of the Depression, eventually leading the country towards economic recovery. And so, the Great Depression, a time of hardship and struggle, finally came to an end, leaving behind lessons of resilience, adaptability, and the critical importance of economic stability. As we look back on this challenging period, we are reminded of the resilience of the human spirit and the importance of economic stability in our society. As the chapter of history unfolds, remember to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more such compelling content. Your support fuels our desire to bring more historical narratives to life.